All right, here we go back with standard number 5, talking about the Constitution. Should be a fun video right here. Standard number 5, we're going to investigate the specific events and key ideas that brought about the adoption and implementation of the Constitution. And once again, here are your key terms. Make sure you know those. And we'll move right into it. So, the Articles of Confederation. The colonists had just broke away from the British, and now they're trying to establish their own nation, and they want to create a confederation because the confederation allows states to have more sovereignty over themselves. And these Articles of Confederation is going to create this loose unification of the nation and allow the states their independence that they wanted from the British. So there's going to be good things and bad things that our Confederation does, and we're going to talk about the good things first. So the first good thing we're going to talk about is on the left. You have the Land Ordinance of 1785, and this Land Ordinance is going to basically just lay out the land and basically say, hey, come out here and settle on this land. And then you have on the right where focus more on the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and as it shows on the map, the ordinance is going to ban slavery, and we'll talk about more that the ordinance is going to do. This Northwest Territory composed of what is today 5 states: Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana. So the strengths of the Articles of Confederation: you have the Land Ordinance 1785, which you talked about. You have the Northwest Ordinance that's going to divide the area into smaller territories and provide guidelines under which territories can become states inside of the United States. It's very important because we have to get from 13 to 50. So the 4 benefits of the Northwest Ordinance: the government is going to encourage westward expansion by allowing territories or outlining how territories can become states. You have the emancipation of slaves in the Northwest Territory, and you have laws which is going to admit new states inside of the United States, as the ones that we talked about on the last slide, and it's going to mandate that for every so many miles there's a public school. So one negative of the Northwest Ordinance is that banning slavery is going to make certain states upset. You would never guess who, right? Absolutely. The southern states are going to be very upset about the banning of slavery in the Northwest Territory, because if they ban it in the Northwest Territory, they could potentially ban slavery in the southern states. It just showed that the federal government is possibly against slavery. This Articles of Confederation has success, but it also has failures. And as you see right here, there's going to be rough sellings ahead for the Articles of Confederation. We'll talk about those rough sellings. Part of the rough sellings for the Articles of Confederation was that they had no executive branch. That means they could not enforce the laws. They lacked the power to tax. That means they did not have money. They could not regulate commerce or establish a currency. And most of the power was given to the states because it is a confederation. And they did this because they feared a strong central government like the British was over them during the colonial era. So the weakness of the Articles of Confederation is going to convince the Americans that they need a stronger government. And what exposes the weakness is Shays' Rebellion. Daniel Shays' Rebellion is going to expose the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. This rebellion is going to be a rebellion among farmers in Massachusetts that had fallen into debt and about to lose their farm, and they rise up and rebel against the Massachusetts government, and they're not able to put it down. These rebellions happen in many states, but this Shays' Rebellion is going to make people like George Washington appeal to the people and say, hey, we have to come up with a better form of government. So these are review questions. Go back and answer those. And we'll move on to the Constitution. So the Constitutional Convention was held in Philadelphia, 1787, where George Washington was chosen to be the president, the first president of the United States of these Americas. The Constitution was created to establish the federal or central government. Make sure you know they're interchangeable. The Constitution, these are ideas that came up at the Constitutional Convention. You had the New Jersey Plan, which wanted everybody to have equal representation which favored the smaller states, and you had the Virginia plan, which wanted every state to have representatives based off their population, which favored the large state. They're going to take both these plans, put them together, and create the Great Compromise, which creates a bicameral legislative body composing of a Senate and a House of Representatives, so that both big states and small states would be happy. And this Great Compromise is going to solve the issue of how states would be represented inside of the federal government. We still use this same process today. Each state's going to get 2 senators, and each state's get a certain number of representatives based off the state's population. And as I said before, the Great Compromise sets up a bicameral legislative body, bi meaning 2, cameral meaning houses or chambers. On this map, it shows you the number of slaves that are in each state. The southern states, because they feared that they would lose representation because there are less whites living in the southern states than in the northern states, they wanted to find a way to count their slaves. And the way that they find is to come up with a compromise, because they can't call them people, because if they call them a whole person, that means slavery would probably be wrong. So they came up with a compromise, and they're going to just make these slaves 3/5 of a person, right? So they count 3/5 of the slave population toward their population when it comes to representation in the House of Representatives, where representation is based off the state's population. Let's move it on. The division of powers. The division of powers was very big with establishing the Constitution, because they didn't want any group of people to have too much power. And because if that group had too much power, they'd be able to abuse that power and create what we call tyranny, right? And this division of power, as we see right here, is division of power between the national government and the state government. And some of those powers are shared powers. As you see on the left, most of the national government's powers are more things that will impact people, like declaration of war, like currency, like making foreign treaties, stuff like that. While states are able to do more local things, like establish schools, establish a local government, things like that. This shared power is known as federalism. Federalism is power divided between the national government and the state government. And then we have our 3 branches of government. You have the 3 branches of government that are going to be able to impact each other. They wanted to separate the powers, but they also wanted a way that those powers could check each other and balance each other out. And as you see right here on this diagram, there's several checks and balances. These checks and balances are going to limit the national government by balancing the power between the legislative, executive, and the judicial branch, giving each branch certain powers over the other branch. For example, the president is able to veto legislation, while the Supreme Court can rule that a bill signed by the president is unconstitutional. That power they gave themselves, but we won't go there. Then you have separation of powers. This idea of separation of powers, separating the legislative, executive, and the judicial branch. The concept of separation of powers was brought up by a French philosopher, Charles de Montesquieu. And Montesquieu said that if you don't separate the powers, you're going to have one branch that has too much power. You don't want that. So these are the review questions. You could pause the video and try to answer those. Then we have these guys. These are the Federalists, and the Federalists were for establishing the Constitution. They had to go and convince anti-federalists that was against establishing a strong federal government, that we needed a strong central government. And in order to do that, the Federalists wrote the Federalist Papers. They write these Federalist Papers trying to convince the anti-federalists to ratify the Constitution. And the problem was that the anti-federalists were fearful that a strong central government would take away their rights. In order to get rid of that fear, James Madison is going to write up the Bill of Rights inside of the Federalist Papers and promise them to the anti-federalists. And these anti-federalists are going to eventually agree to ratify the Constitution. So the Federalists wanted a Constitution with a strong national government. Anti-federalists didn't. The anti-federalists led by Thomas Jefferson, while the Federalists was led by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. The Bill of Rights, as you see right here, you can pause them, look at them, write them down, take a picture. We'll talk about the 1st, 9th, and 10th Amendment. So the First Amendment gives you your 5 freedoms: the freedom of religion, the freedom of speech, the freedom of press, the right to petition, and the freedom of assembling together. And the Ninth Amendment is people's freedom. It states that anything not specifically mentioned inside of the Constitution, you are free to do. And the 10th just applies the same things to the state. Anything that's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution, states are free to do. And that's going to bring us to the final review questions, guys. You can pause the video and answer these review questions. We will see you back for standard number 6. This is the end of domain 1. If you're preparing for domain 1 tests, this is a wrap, and you'll be ready for domain 1 if you study standard 1 through 5. You guys be great and have a wonderful day.